Hi, everyone. It's me, Finn Lockwood. I am the trans program curator at New Haven Pride Center. And today I am really excited to finally have this program go live called Finding Gender Through Fantasy with Xero Skyfire, who I will be introducing shortly. This is going to be the first of what is going to turn into a series of conversations, which we're going to be calling Beyond the Binary. And it's just going to be a series of conversations with different members of the non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, etc. community who are providing awareness and representation of our identities through their work and just through their existence. So I'm really excited to kick this off with Xero and just, show you how many ways you can be non-binary outside of the binary. So before we begin, I just want to give a quick land acknowledgement. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are hosting this event. The New Haven Pride Center was founded on and operates on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and Quinnipiac peoples. From whatever occupied land you are, please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands we all occupy and the history of the places we know. To find out more about Native lands, you can visit native-land.ca. And before I bring Xero out, I do want to just give a quick content warning. This panel is recommended for folks 18 and up because we are going to be talking about adult and sexual themes. So just keep that in mind. But it's going to be a great conversation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest, Xero. There she is. Hey.
Hi. I'm so fucking hyped.
You are beaming with excitement. It is so good to have you here, Xero. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have been working on this for quite a while now. It's been like almost over a month. And it's cool because I feel like, when I met you, you were like a stranger to me. You were just a really awesome artist that I admired on the internet. And now I feel like we're friends now. So it's great.
I agree.
It's great to be able to connect with you, especially because I'm in Connecticut and you are in Tennessee, right?
For my sins.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just cool to be able to bring our community together virtually like this. So thanks for joining us. I wanted to start off just by kind of having you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your artwork and what you do.
Sure. Well, hi, I'm Xero. I use she, they pronouns. Identify as transfemme gender heretic is usually how I word it because none of the available words feel quite right. And in the words of Miguel Connor, heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just is.
It is a lot of fun.
I like to keep that in there with me. As to who I am and what I do, I like to say rather flippantly, I draw boobs on the internet for a living, but basically, yeah, that's actually what I do, as flippant as that sounds. Sometimes that involves doing comics and story-based stuff. At the moment, not as much as I would like, because commissions are what pays the bills.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping to change that in time, but for now, that's what I do. So I do a lot of commission work. I draw a lot of people's original characters, and that on its own is really enjoyable because I've gotten to see quite a bit of gender expression as my clients have brought to me, which, at first I wasn't sure what to do with. I was excited at the idea, but I don't want to fuck your gender up. But
I think that's the thing with commissions too, though. It's like they're coming to you with such a personal idea, and gender is extremely personal. So to have to depict that is a pretty interesting thing, I can imagine.
It is, yeah. And I've had a couple cases actually where I was sort of helping someone figure out gender stuff via the art. I have one person who's a long-standing client who the first piece she commissioned from me was, hey, I'm having gender feels and I'm exploring the feminine side and I don't quite know how to identify. And we ended up talking about it and stuff because, gender is one of my special interests. So,
yes.
you've activated my trap card. So she does that, and we end up talking for a while, and we kind of become friends and start kind of like touching base and sharing our experiences with our gender stories as they happen in parallel. But the first illustration she had me do was this extremely erotic fantasy of her idealized female persona getting absolutely fucked senseless by a giant dragon. So there were a lot of things happening there in terms of both gender and sexuality, and I got to explore those with her, which was just honestly an absolute delight. And I've done several pieces for her since then, and there's been this kind of evolution as she steps further into herself, and now we're working on this extremely personal piece that's kind of like a two-part allegorical, like what's the word? Diptych, there we go, of like before and after, kind of telling her story. So there's a very masculine, like Templar knight, like crying after having burned a church down or something, and then on the other side is this gorgeous, very Aquarian princess with all this scales and stuff, but she's looking down into a pool, and like his reflections there, and like he's looking down into a pool and her reflections there. It's a really badass idea, and like that whole concept is hers. I'm just trying to midwife it, but it's really, really enjoyable. So every now and then I get to do something really cool like that.
That's really, I feel like that whole story just kind of taps into exactly what I wanted this conversation to be about, which is like you as like a fantasy, erotic, like sci-fi, whatever kind of like alternate reality genre you tie into, like that's your thing, and like erotica. And it's so interesting to me that you're having people come to you specifically asking for fantasy, but like representation. It's like taking the unreal and the real and kind of combining it and like creating something that looks like recognizable to you. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean,
yeah,
that's kind of, you just sort of described like my model of what creativity is. So in everything I do in life, I'm coming from a very animist lens, which is essentially just saying that life and consciousness are the fundamental thing that all reality is made up of. Putting 1,000 asterisks after bringing up the title, especially given the wonderful acknowledgement of the land we started with, the movie Pocahontas, that, can you paint with all the colors of the wind, is a very animist explanation. One that's more accessible to me, both culturally and experientially, and to a lot of people, is the Force. Star Wars.
The Force, yes.
Surrounds us, penetrates us, binds us, flows from and through every living being. You can control its actions, but it also controls and guides you. Life. Right? So coming at it from that angle, I therefore also see ideas and imaginative realms. Those have a reality too. They're part of this life thing that is happening. They're part of that dreaming. And whenever I'm trying to create something, I'm collaborating with these non-physical, probably non-linear, non-temporal things and bringing them on some level into this world. I'm giving them an anchor or a foothold or a presence in this world. And to be able to do that with another human mind is even more enjoyable, because there's the elements they saw and brought, and there's the elements I saw and brought, and then together we all try to make something that feels real. And yeah, doing that specifically around people's sexuality and gender it's an absolute delight. Sometimes it feels like I'm midwifing them, I'm holding space so that their gender can come through, because they just need to see it clearer, so they ask somebody else to take a look at it. And so I take a look at it and I bring it in, and that isn't all my work. A lot of it is also just, hi, I'm horny, and this is my fetish, please draw it. And it's like, cool, that sounds great too, because I'm still doing the same thing. Somebody's got a fantasy, somebody's got a thing that makes their gears turn, and I'm just helping make it real.
And that's not just drawing horny artwork or someone's fetish or whatever. Like, I think that representation is helping forge reality. I'm glad you brought up like the idea of animism, like the idea of like things that we might think as like inanimate objects having some sort of energy or life to them, like as an artist, I think that power is really strong because like again, we're taking ideas and concepts that feel like they can only exist in our brain and we're putting them into reality by putting them on paper. This might be going a little bit off topic, but I was watching a documentary on Netflix last night. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Disclosure with Laverne Cox.
No.
And it's just talking about, I think you would love it. It's talking about trans representation in media, like, throughout like all of the years and everything like that. And they were talking about a couple of the trans folks that they were interviewing on the program. They were talking about Bugs Bunny and how Bugs Bunny was kind of like something like that planted the seed in their head. Because if you remember from Bugs Bunny comics, like, or cartoons, like Bugs was often dressed up as like a woman, there's this the one cartoon in particular that they were talking about on the documentary was like where the, Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny were reenacting like an opera. And Bugs Bunny, yeah, that one. And like there were like, there were like multiple trans people being like, I saw something in Bugs, because of the way she was, well, whatever gender Bugs was using in that, but the way Bugs was represented was like fantasy, yes, but like it was done in a positive light because like they made her beautiful and like likable and like
it wasn't just for laughs. Like it was for laughs.
Exactly.
And, like, I think there's I think about this often, especially as a trans feminine person. Like there is still something sort of funny when a person who was raised and identifies masculine suddenly is sitting in front of you very feminine, and there's this collision of unexpected things there. And an initial reaction to any sort of collision of unexpected things is to laugh. But laughing isn't inherently a bad thing. It can turn into something hostile. Or it could just be a sudden expression of joy because look at this, isn't this great?
Yes.
Right? And for me, that's my reaction to Bugs in a dress was just like, this isn't it
like
great?
Pure
Bugs
joy.
is in a dress, and
yes.
he can get away with it, and no one cares. This is cool.
Yes.
Just that notion of being able to transform.
Absolutely. Exactly.
And be something other than what people expected you to be, and just by doing that, all the problems you were facing suddenly, they take on a different flavor. I absolutely, and it's funny, Bugs Bunny is very much a trickster deity archetype.
Yeah.
The whole deal with the trickster, at least as I understand it, is that it's basically somebody who knows it's all a game, who's in on the joke, who knows where it all ends. To use Alan Watts' phrase, they're in the green room.
Yes.
They've been backstage. And their job is sort of the moment everyone starts taking the game a little too seriously, the trickster has to show up and fuck some shit up for a while so everybody will loosen up a little bit and enjoy the process again, get back into the game.
Yes.
Right? What better way to do that than to show up in a world where people are very convinced that there are only two ways to be in the world and that they must conform very, very closely to an ideal that we've never even fully defined. And if you break away from that one way or the other, we're going to pathologize it. We're terrified of it.
Yes.
And now you've got all these people who are just wound up and anxious all the time because, they're trying to hold something still that can't hold still. So along comes Bugs Bunny the trickster and says, nah.
Yes.
Shows up saying, "What's up, Doc?" In a dress and looking great.
Yes.
And making a lot of us ask questions we weren't ready to know the answers to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I also find it significant that one of the major characters in the latest Matrix movie is Bugs.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the Matrix, I feel like that is also like, again, another, like, the one of the Wachowski sisters was on that documentary as well, Disclosure, that I was mentioning. And
well, that cements my desire to watch it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And just kind of like, I think it's really interesting to look at that piece of art or media and like when I found out that, you know, the person who made this movie was trans and I went back and I watched it, I was like, this makes so much sense. Like, and it also makes sense why I gravitated towards it, because I think there's something that like we put into our artwork as like, you know, trans, non-binary people that like other people recognize almost, you know?
The gaydar is a very real thing.
Absolutely.
And I don't think it just applies to when you're in physical proximity to a person.
That is so true. That is so true.
There's a certain amount of, oh yeah, I can smell it in their art. I can smell it in their whatever. Like, it's just there.
Yes.
Whether or not they acknowledge it and whether or not they ever do.
Absolutely.
And if nothing else, they've created something where the gay in me finds itself. And even if that's just in me, and it turns out that it had nothing whatever to do with them, like, nonetheless.
Yeah.
Namaste. The gay in me recognizes the gay. Namaste,
so
maybe.
I have a question about your art. So
sure.
Have you seen any of that, like, in the process of making your artwork, where you look back at your older work maybe and you're like, oh, I was trying to tell myself something, or like, oh, that makes sense why I was drawing this, or things like that? Did you use your art to kind of like process through gender feels and things like that?
You know, as a matter of fact, I did. I haven't thought explicitly about this in quite some time, but when I was coming out of college, I was trying like hell to make a webcomic. My hero at the time is Sen Diaz, who is a fairly recently out as trans and non-binary comic creator. Makes an amazing comic called Dresden Kodak, which I've loved for a very long time. And I was kind of trying to follow in her footsteps. Of course, at the time, we were both very manly. Thank you very much. So, you know, I had this comic I was trying to make, and it was called Henshin. It was my attempt at kind of a love song to Power Rangers, and exploring the concepts of transformation and vaguely trying to dream of an idyllic future while I was at it. It was very ambitious, and I had no clue what I was doing, and you know, the project fell apart. But I spent a lot of time imaginally exploring and sketching that realm, and I had the main character, whose name was Jake. Jake was AMAB, but very, very feminine presenting. Gorgeous long hair, bangs. When he transformed, his hair got even longer as like a stylistic flourish. And he had this best friend who was one of the girls on the team, and I had this whole plot later on where I wanted them to be able to fuse, rather Steven Universe-like.
Yes.
And I was going to start experimenting with the fact that different Rangers could fuse and have different abilities and identities and all this stuff come from it. But I can remember playing around with what it was like to be in that fused character's body and head, and just the sheer liberty and power I felt thinking of that. And looking back now, I can really see that I was processing things sort of ahead of time, like priming myself to be ready, so that once I started really figuring this stuff out, I would already have a sort of personal myth to fall back on.
Yeah, I love that. And then you said that was when you were out of college?
Yeah, that would have been like, I started working on Henshin somewhere around 2011, 2012, I think. And then around 2013, 2014, I was trying to create pages. It's actually still up. I can find the link. It's under my dead name and all this other stuff. And it's old, and I'm not particularly proud of it anymore.
Yeah.
But it still exists, and the story is definitely still with me.
Yeah. And like, there's still like little like gems and like things that you can pick out of it and like appreciate, even if just for the fact that it's like you know, like a landmark in your journey of, you know, figuring yourself out or learning about yourself.
Yeah.
I think that it's one thing you mentioned was really interesting to me, is like the idea of fusion. And like, obviously we think of Steven Universe with like, you know, fusions and things like that, but I didn't think about it with, like,
was a big deal for me.
What's that?
Stevani was a big deal.
Absolute. Me too. But I didn't think about it like in terms of like Power Rangers and stuff, how like they kind of combine two to like create something else. And like, you know, I think there are so many different ways to exist as someone who's outside of the binary, but like for me, like the idea of like fusing with all of these parts, like not having to lose any of your parts and keeping them all instead of like shedding them is like what my experience as like a gender non-conforming person is, you know? And I think like, you know, characters like Stevani and stuff like that, if anyone hasn't watched Steven Universe out there, like go check it out, because like it's, you know, it's got flaws like everything, but I do think that it's a really good piece of, you know, LGBT like media. But yeah, I just love the idea of like, you know, embracing all sides of you, like taking in the masculine and the feminine, and like also just like redefining what those words even mean too, you know?
Yeah, making a greater degree of room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Space
Absolutely.
for everything I am, not trying to put it into a container, and not or not chopping it into pieces.
Yes.
Putting it into a bunch of different containers, but saying, no, let's all get in here together.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Why would we be the separate Zords when we could be the Megazord, right?
Yes. Like, yes. That's you know, this is just to kind of I feel like we've gone like so far off like what our actual
we knew that was going to happen. Come on.
Yeah, but I'm loving it. But I do have one question here on my list of questions that I feel like kind of ties into this, like, and I think we've answered it a little bit too, but I want to know in your own words, like, what do you think is, like, as a non-binary, you know, gender fluid, trans femme person, what do you find so appealing about like sci-fi fantasy, you know, creating these different realities and worlds? Like, what is so important about that to you, and how do you feel like it helps us break down you know, societal structures?
Yeah. That is a big and nebulous question, and I love it.
Yeah.
So, well, like I said earlier, I take an animist stance, and stories and ideas to me are part of the living ecosystem. Every bit is much a part of it as the tangible and the physical, and the, you know, the vaguely tangible, like radio waves or magnetic forces, or I don't know, sunlight, right? Like, we don't necessarily think of those as concrete, but those are an important part of the ecosystem as well. They are part of what creates it. We just sort of take them for granted.
Yeah.
I believe that if consciousness is an essential component of life, and if it's the thing underneath everything, then one of the things consciousness does is dream and imagine and play and ask the question, what if? And I think that all of history, prehistory, everything we know sort of bears out this idea that it's the beings who can adapt and change, who can rise to that question of what if. It's those beings that go on and that bring the greatest benefit to their ecosystem. And it's those that are the catalyst for change that allows the species in question to be more robust and more able to handle challenges that come their way and to keep growing with the world around them rather than being shed off. So I think when we develop our capacity for dreaming and imagining and asking what if, we create a greater degree of flexibility in our actual reality. You know, I can't do something unless I imagine it's possible. I might not have to be able to imagine the exact thing, but I need to imagine that the rough shape of that thing is a thing that can actually happen in the world. If I don't even know that, I won't try, right? It's the whole beginner's luck or you know, sort of magic that children have, is like nobody's told them the rules yet.
Yeah.
So they don't play by them.
Yeah.
And in many cases, if you do that right, you find that instead of breaking rules, you've just made new ones. You've created more room, more flexibility. And I see exploration of gender, exploration of how one presents in the world and how one would like to be answered for that presentation. That invites a lot of possibility. And I don't think it doesn't stop at gender or sexuality, right? Like we talk about those things as if they're so
Yes.
small. But my gender is, how do you define a gender? Can you eat it? Like my gender is how I interface with the world.
Yep.
That's no small thing. And you've got a bunch of people coming forward with a bunch of new ways of interfacing with the world that have never been seen before or felt, that by the very nature of expressing them shake up the structure they're in. You know, it gets everybody kind of excited and riled up, and we get reactions. Some people are angry, some people are confused. Whole new things like this center show up now, because now we need a place for all these weirdos to hang out, right? And talk, because you got to find the others. You know, you don't want to be alone, and so you find
That's
the other
right.
weirdos. Very, very sort of X-Men about that, right? Like you just start doing that, and like without trying, without consciously making any effort to do so all the time, just the existence of queer people who want to hang out and would like to stay alive, please. Just that permanently changes the world.
Yes.
Over and over and over and over and over again, just by existing, you know. And yeah, that means that some of them are also up in arms and saying, not only would we like to live, please, you'd better let us, and you'd better start acknowledging our reality.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just as many others who are like, I don't need their permission.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I have no interest in making this system conform to me. I belong somewhere else, and I'm just the first step to getting to that somewhere else, so you better catch up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all of those things are changing the world around us right in front of our faces right this very second, and they're the result of that kind of dreaming. They're the direct result of exploration and play. I also think,
wow,
I was thinking about this last night, I also think the imagination sometimes serves as the primer for these things. I was thinking about this when I was thinking about the Matrix. I was thinking about some of the comics I grew up reading. I was thinking about just all these things that I could see sort of weirdly, they were like premonitions, right? Kind of like you look at Star Trek, right? And they're using a thing that looks a hell of a lot like a flip cell phone long before that was a thing.
Yeah.
There was a screen they would look at that was supposedly a computer monitor, right? But those didn't exist yet. They were just staring at a light on the set. But our imagination filled in that gap. And then it comes into our world later as people imagine it. And of course, a lot of the people who imagined it saw that footage and were therefore inspired. But yeah, that's why the image wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Step one was get somewhere where somebody can see me. Step two, that person who can see me might try to make me real.
Yeah.
But looked at it another way, it also is just, it kind of primes you to be ready for it.
Yeah.
You know, so since I grew up watching The Matrix and watching Sailor Moon and whatever else, like I had a sort of mental shape I could make sense of all the change and all the rule breaking and whatever else with. I had a myth that I could kind of hang my experience on, and thus I was already kind of ready for it.
Yes.
Right? It kind of feels like that. And I think that's another one of the things that the imaginal realm does, is it will also just, the ideas will show up first as sort of pioneer species, so that we kind of are used to the notion, even if we're not really seeing it a whole lot. And then as it becomes physical and as it becomes part of our lived experience more and more, it's like, all right, well, we've already had a little bit of gentle visualization practice in living with this thing, so it's not a total shock.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That is such a good point. And it reminds me again too of that documentary I watched. I'm so glad I watched that documentary last night, because I feel like I really but you know, one of the speakers was talking about how, you know, like over the years there has been so much like horrifyingly negative representation of trans and GNC folks in the media. And, you know, obviously that is horrible. And as a trans person, you know, traumatic and upsetting to see. But, you know, this person was also saying, like, were it not for that representation, or the fact that it at least showed me that it existed, even if it's a negative representation. It's still, again, kind of giving you that little spark in your imagination where it's like, okay, this might not be portrayed in the way I want it to be portrayed, but at least it's a possibility, you know?
At least that exists.
Exactly. And, you know, I think, like, again, obviously that is why it's so important that we have more and more people doing positive work in terms of representation, you know, like
For sure.
kind of bring it back around to your work, like shout out to your Patreon and everything. Like, people should definitely check out your work because it is awesome. It's so nice to just scroll through all of your images and stuff and just see like a naked trans body, and like, you know, be it like some kind of fantastical, you know, like, I don't know, I feel like I saw one that was kind of like cyborg-esque or something like that, or like you have some like commissions that I think were like furries and things like that. Like, just to see like a naked trans body just like chilling, like beautifully drawn, like you can tell that the artist, like, even without knowing you, looking at your artwork, you can tell you have like a deep reverence and like respect for bodies, all kinds of bodies. Like, I think that's what I want to see more in terms of like our representation, is just like people doing stuff with like trans actors, trans characters, and like not making it a big deal, just doing whatever, you know, and like doing it in a positive and fun, empowering way.
Like, show me a world where this is just another thing.
Yes.
Show me a world where gender isn't a big deal. Maybe you can show me one where it doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
What's that? You know, how's that work? You know, because I don't know, I feel like a lot of gender is sort of defined by power structure and what that power structure lets you do. If that's gone, what's a gender at that point? What do you mean, what's her gender? I don't know what that means. I just know that that person likes this or that and wears these colors and, you know, tends to have sex with this or that, but I don't know. They're a person. What does that tell? What does their gender tell me about them? Who are they? You know, when that becomes the conversation, I think is where we're really going to get excited. And where we'll know we've made it somewhere, is when, you know, we're not talking about what boxes you can check, you know, or where to send your tax statement, you know, or what job you do to make your money, where we're just talking about who you are and what you mean to people and what you're passionate about. And that's how we identify you, is by you, not by what box we think you fit in.
Yes. Yeah. Another question I had for you that I definitely want to make sure we have time to talk about this is your work with the website, the adult website, Oh Joy Sex Toy. To kind of segue into this conversation. I think that was like really the first introduction of my like getting to know your work. And it was really cool. Our mutual friend Rachel is the person who connected us, who is going to be doing programming with us in the future at the New Haven Pride Center, which is really exciting. And you know, she was just telling me about this cool artist that she knows that works for this, or did work for this website, Oh Joy Sex Toy. And I got really excited about that in particular, because I think that websites like Oh Joy Sex Toy are so important. Like, the fact that they exist, because it's a resource for like, you know, like adult content, like finding good sex toys and things like that for everybody. You know, it's not like I, as a trans person, oftentimes feel like I don't know where to go when I want to find, you know, sexual content that like actually represents me and like, you know, considers me as a person, as opposed to like, again, like, I think it's, when you're talking about like this kind of thing, it tends to be very gendered, you know? So I was super stoked to hear you did work for them, long story short. And I wanted to kind of hear about what the process like was what the process was like for that, and like your experience working for Oh Joy Sex Toy, and also just like a little bit about what Oh Joy Sex Toy is and your experience too.
Yeah, sure. Oh Joy Sex Toy is the best comic on the whole wide world internet. Like, you should just go read it now. You'll feel better. But it's a wonderful, wonderful comic that it has autobiographical elements. You know, so Matt and Erica they have a lot of their figuring sexual stuff out comic material on there. There's a lot of educational, just like they've got a whole thing about, I don't know, anal safety.
That's
the
yes.
anal sex safety snails, right? Like
Yes, and that's the
slow
kind of stuff I love.
and slimy, right? Like that's the idea.
Yep.
Whatever, right? So
It totally just, like, desensitizes, like, the
mhm,
like, all like, sex acts, like, it does
yeah.
not demonize you, you
No,
know?
there's no demonization and there's no idealization either. It's just,
Mm,
this is an awesome thing that people like to do. Here's some things that are awesome about it. Here's why you should do it. Here's how you could do it.
mhm.
There's sex toy reviews, there's
Yes.
how-to guides, but there's also like pages and pages and pages of guest comics about, here's how I understand my gender. Well, here's how I understand my gender. Here's how I understand my sexuality. I'm ace, and I'm going to write about what my life is like from my kind of ace, and there's a couple of those. There's one where it's like, hey, I'm as ace as you can get. I don't have sex, I don't do sex, I don't do nothing. My only relationship with sex is stories or whatever, and here's what that looked like, and on and on and on. And
It's
so
awesome.
you get to meet all these people's minds and ways of being, and they get to talk about it with their own voice, which I think is wonderful. And then there's also just a bunch of fantasies, just fun, sexy stuff for us to go and read and enjoy, because there's no shame in that either.
Yes.
So Matt reached out to me out of the fucking blue sky. I hadn't done any comic work in a long time. I had done almost none under my name. There's some stuff
Mhm.
under my dead name and under previous attempts at branding that didn't go well. But there was not really a whole lot of comic stuff that I had done. So I was already sort of taken aback. I was like, why is this dude reaching out to me for comic work? Like, it was weird because comics are a thing that I really, really want to do, that I love.
Mhm.
The medium of comics is one of the most important ones to me. I think it has incredible potential that no other media really manages to land. And it's, borderline on a universal language, right? It's hieroglyphics. It's the same thing. Images in order with meaning.
Mhm.
And so I really wanted to do them. They've always been important to me, but I just, time is a factor, and,
Mhm.
whatever else. And I'm working on that
Yeah.
because spending a lifetime wanting to do a thing and not doing it is a great way to go insane.
Oh, yeah.
But so I had actually just done some ritual around that, look, I want to make some comics, and it'd be nice if it helped me make a living, just because right now that's tough.
Yes.
And like on the heels of that, I just get this random email from them, and I'd never spoken to them before, and I never worked with them before. And Matt's just like, I love your work. We'd love to have you do a comic for us. If you have any ideas you'd like to pitch, go for it. They can be educational, or they can just be a fantasy or whatever. And I was like, uh,
To get
why?
completely, like,
Yeah. No,
total control like that.
they were just like,
Incredible.
pitch some ideas, and we'll tell you what we think, basically. So I pitched a handful of them. And among them was what eventually became Flash Runner, which was
Yes.
just a Mirror's Edge inspired cyberpunk parkour nudism fantasy, basically, just like, or
Mhm.
exhibitionism fantasy. And it was cool because they were like, well, with exhibitionism, like, we, as a fantasy, we want to be careful, because obviously if you're actually going to run around in the real world, doing risky things, you are risking pulling someone else into your play, which, is a sticky consent place and can
True.
cause other people undue discomfort. And so they're like, well, we don't want to encourage that necessarily, but we also want to enjoy this as a fantasy. So we kind of had to work together to make sure that, like, it played by the rules, essentially.
Yes.
So it was very much that was where I decided, oh, well, this person's a streamer. She's a cam girl, and this is her show for the day. And
Mhm.
if we reach X tokens, I'll take it off, right? And if
Mhm.
we reach more tokens, I'll go find some place to masturbate, and we'll do that, right? And so that was the comic.
Yep.
And because we were both big cyberpunk fans, and just loved that whole aesthetic, we clicked right away. And there was basically they were like, yeah, no, that's good, great. There was a process of doing thumbnails, getting those approved, kind of sending each wave of production as it got done, and then sending the final in. And it was really smooth. There was a little bit of feedback here and there, but it wasn't super involved. It wasn't super controlling. I ended up self-directedly redoing a page because I realized there was a much better layout I could use, and I ran that by them once it was done. They were like, yeah, that is better, good.
Hmm.
So I had a very fortunate experience that also, for whatever reason, we just synced up really well, and it was kind of frictionless, which was really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was fun. It was also very, very intense.
Yes.
I put down like almost all my other work to get it done quickly.
How many hours would you say you put into it
Oh
total? Because like
gosh,
I
I
feel
don't
like
know.
each panel serves as like its own work of art. Like
Oh,
each
thank
panel,
you.
I don't know. If that were me doing that, that would probably take me like a year. Not even kidding.
It
Like
took me like at least a week or two of really and truly not working on anything else.
yeah, just like really.
My ADHD hyperfocus had everything it needed. It had interest, it had novelty, it had challenge, and it had urgency.
Mhm.
All those came together in this comic project, and so I had nothing else in my life for a brief time. It's a bit of a haze, honestly.
Yeah.
But and of course, it had its phase where I fucking hated it and thought I had made nothing but trash,
Yep.
and had to deal with all the imposter syndrome stuff. And then I finished it and sent it off, and they loved it, and so does everybody else apparently, which I'm so moved by because I'm pretty critical of that comic. Actually,
Are
there are a lot of
you?
things I would change. Yeah, it's mostly a pacing thing. If I
Gotcha.
may drag myself on a thing in which I'm supposed to be, some great speaker, I feel that I didn't pace the action very well, and so in the end, when she finally masturbates, like it's over too quickly. I felt like
Mhm.
some of that's a result of the page number restriction. I could only do 5 pages, but I look back and I feel like if I could do it again and I still had that restriction, I would try to find a way to spread that out just a little bit more, so there'd be a little bit more build up with the actual sex act as opposed to all the stuff she's doing to kind of tease beforehand. That still
Gotcha.
functions as a nice build up, but I just felt like you know, I could have used a couple more panels of her playing with herself to really make the fantasy immersive before she comes in the end comes around. But
Gotcha.
it's very nitpicky, and I recognize that. I don't know. I like to tinker,
Yeah.
but despite that, I'm very proud of it. It was so much fun.
Yeah. And that's still up on Oh Joy Sex Toy, right? Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I highly recommend everybody check that out when they can. One thing I definitely wanted to ask you before, because we got like about 15 minutes. So I wanted to ask you um, about solar punk, because we were kind of talking about cyberpunk. So let's go into a different type of punk right now. I know
That's
that solar punk is definitely something that you're really interested in.
yeah.
So I just give us like a definition of it real quick and the kind of
Sure.
like what you find so appealing about it.
Yeah. So solar punk is a burgeoning genre of speculative fiction and art that is exploring the notion of a future in which humanity lives in harmony with its environment. So this is either we averted or post climate change sort of setting.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a humanity that is, using green technologies and organizes itself in nonviolent ways. And it's a you can consider it a type of utopianism.
Yep.
So it's essentially just trying to dream what a world like that would be, and rather than trying to do the sort of Luddite thing where we go back to a previous time, we return to our hunter-gatherer roots or whatever, and it just looks just like it did then. This is more like it's a bit like Terence McKenna's Archaic Revival, where it's like we reach back and we grab the things that worked well before that we need and we bring them back, but then we also bring everything we have to bear and make something new and beautiful that is neither.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very green, it's very, lots of plant life and solar power and, a variety of aesthetics and culturally diverse, very, very colorful, very bright, very hopeful. And it's punk, not because the people in the story are being punk, which is more what the early cyberpunk stuff would be. And more, it's punk because we're daring to dream in that beautiful world while we're living in the cyberpunk dystopia.
Yeah. It's more like the ideology of punk as opposed to like, look
Right,
at my
right.
studded belt.
Participating in this kind of imagineering
Yes.
is what's punk.
Yes.
I'm looking at the horrible world and I'm on a website, with a little bird on it that every day tells me that the world's going to end probably today, and I should get really upset about it. And if that doesn't work, then there's any number of news outlets that want to make sure that I know the same. And if I don't do that, then I know that everything's fine. Please go buy more stuff. In either case, neither of those are a particularly hopeful message, right? It's either it's all going to stay exactly like it is now, everything's fine, please don't panic, or we're all going to die because Mama Gaia is mad at us and is going to destroy us or something because we're the virus.
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
How about we imagine it all going well and us finally figuring our shit out and learning to work together and building a beautiful world in which we recognize that we are part of a wider ecosystem, part of a wider organism, and we start acting like it. We start relating to all those people that are non-human around us all the time instead of trying to ignore them out of existence and insist we can fix it on our own. What happens when you do that? And solar punk is a great representation of that. My first work of fiction in that genre, and one that I highly recommend, is called Wings of Renewal. It's a solar punk anthology, but what I really love about it is that it's also fantasy.
Okay.
Speculative fiction in the best way, where they're just asking that question, what if? So a lot of it is very science fiction in that it feels futuristic and all that, but there are also dragons, because fuck you. And how the dragons appear in each story is different, which is really fun to play with. There's one that centers around a person who makes prosthetics for a dragon.
Oh, cool.
That ends up injured and is near their village because people are trying to poach it, right?
Okay.
So it's also really cool because it's like, this isn't actually utopia. There's still jackasses, but we have a new way of dealing with that because we have a new way of organizing humanity. There's another one where dragons, it's so anime, like dragons are spaceships.
Wow, that is extremely.
And so there's a person whose job is to like commune with the dragon so the spaceship flies, and that was fucking cool, right? So you see what I mean about the like, we're dreaming a better world that doesn't all have to look the same, but the idea is we are dreaming of a world in which that harmony exists between humanity and the ecosystem.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And I think if you're not imagining that also involving being interstellar, then I think you're doing it wrong, personally. I was promised by any number of sci-fi stories would be interplanetary by now, and I'm very disappointed.
Catch up, human race.
Yep.
I like the idea. Like, I feel like solar punk is cool because it's like, the storylines might be really like out there, like, dragon spaceships and things like that. But the actual like concept of like utopia looking like a society that is still imperfect, but we have a better way of dealing with it and we know how to do it more harmoniously. That's like believable and palatable, like that's
what I love about it. It does the same thing that the stories that helped me explore my gender did. It allows my mind to actually think that's possible.
Yes.
And open up and ask myself, what if? What would I look like in that world?
Yeah.
What if today's the first day of the history of that world? How would I behave? What would I be doing? What kind of person lives in that world, and who do I have to be to live in that world? Those questions all sort of just start happening without you even realizing it. You just start playing with them and tinkering with them. And the people who know that, like, they're the ones out there making OCs and writing fanfic and, dreaming.
Yes.
I think it's that dreaming that brings us wherever we're going. It may not quite end up as a solar punk world, but lots of people spent lots of time dreaming of cyberpunk, and now here we are. And we got all the bad parts and didn't really get most of the good parts. Once again, I'm feeling a little gypped here.
we got some of it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I wanted a laser sword and flying cars and robot arms, and I didn't get any of that. I got Facebook, only it's 3D.
It's a start,
I guess. I don't know if it's a good one. Oh yeah, now we've got NFTs.
Well, you know what? Like, despite all of your humor, you do seem like you are very hopeful about things at the end of the day. So and I think that is why what you're doing is important too, because like it is giving people hope that there is a possibility for realistic change, you know? So keep that hope alive. Definitely.
I will. I will. And I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Like, that's all I want. At the end of the day, like, I used to be consumed with thoughts of trying to give my work some big grand mission. A lot of that's just my evangelical crap.
Yeah.
And if it's not that, it's the evangelical crap that exists in the entirety of Western culture at large.
Mhm.
The amount of theological stuff that people mistake for common sense is ridiculous.
Mhm.
And so, thinking I had to make one big grand final gesture or something in order for my life to be worthwhile, that choked me up a lot. And now I realize that no, my job is just to make sure people feel good.
Yeah.
My job is just to create things that make them inspired, that make them daydream, that make them feel pleasure in their body, because then they're in their body and they're going to
Mhm.
need to be in their body.
Mhm.
It's living human beings and bodies that get a lot of the work done around here.
Mhm.
Um, I've been told by any number of plant people that it requires a body to dream the way we dream.
Yeah.
That's why we're here, and that's one of our jobs, is to dream and imagine with our body as part of the process. I don't know. Go vape a few of those plants yourself and tell me what you hear. But, um, but yeah, that's as long as it's giving them that sense of pleasure and that sense of hope. Just by doing that, I think that change starts happening.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So we're gonna have to unfortunately wrap it up.
I
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it's already been almost an
feel like we
hour.
just got started.
Yeah. But really quick, I know that you did want to talk a little bit about a GoFundMe that you have started. So if you want to just tell us a little bit about that and where we can find it, and yeah,
Sure. Thank you so much. That's really sweet of you. Yeah.
definitely.
So I'm working on. I'm going to be working with a emotional resilience coach soon. So all the sad stuff that I didn't talk about in my intro. I have CPTSD and I have really intense ADHD. I have a lot of trauma stuff, and all of that has had a pattern of sort of colliding and derailing me throughout my entire life. And that's some of that's just my story, but
Hmm.
I'm at a point in my life where I really feel like I have to move on to the next step, and that has involved pursuing a lot more treatment and a lot more help. And I've meds, therapists, spiritual encounters, the whole shebang. The aforementioned conversations with plant people, um, and I found this coach. His name's Ryan, and I'll post a link to his stuff as well. But he does emotional resilience coaching that's trauma informed, uses a lot of breath work, and it's also a lot of examining the beliefs that you sort of adopted as survival mechanisms because of your trauma,
Hmm.
and learning to upend and change those.
Yeah.
And I've worked with him already a little bit in the context of the breathwork and meditation classes that I met him in, and we've done a few one-on-ones just to see if things would be a good fit, and the difference was night and day working with him. And I strongly feel like this is it. This is what's going to help me out. So I created GoFundMe just to pay for his 3-month emotional resilience program, because right now I'm fucking broke.
Yeah.
Just to put it plainly, I'm broke, and that trauma loop I talked about has knocked me on my ass
It makes
several
it
times
really
over the past
difficult.
year. Yeah, like it's just, and the thing is, like, before before a couple of years ago, before I really, really started accepting my queerness and what I wanted to do for a living, like all the things, I had all kinds of coping mechanisms, but they're maladaptive now. They were all reliant on getting really, really anxious and masking even harder.
Hmm.
um, sort of very Kylo Ren.
Mm.
If I just get angrier about it, if I just go harder, if I just triple down, I'll make it. And for a while, that worked.
Yeah,
If
until it
anybody
completely destroys you.
Exactly, and
Yes.
anybody with ADHD will tell you that like some kinds of trauma are almost the best medication, because you know, all the anxiety and all the nerves like activate your brain and suddenly you can function, right?
Yep.
Regardless, so because of that, it's been a rough year for me financially, and things are very, very tight. And I feel like get this course, get my brain even better taken care of, and I stand a better chance of creating and maintaining some stability after that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the goal. And so I've created a GoFundMe just to raise money for that and for covering like a week's worth of expenses in the middle of that in case the early days of it are a little disruptive, which I feel like they might
Hmm.
be. So we'll post the link to that. And I
And
say
folks,
all that saying, like, I know that the world is on fire and a lot of us have donation burnout. And I don't expect anything from anybody. I'm just reaching out to the ecosystem and saying, I have a need. Help me
sure.
fill it if you can. You
Yep.
know, so the answer to whether or not you should give is whether or not you feel like you can, I would say.
Yeah. And folks can also to support you on Patreon as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. So that's also, and you get all sorts of cool freebies and stuff as a Patreon member, which I am, of course. So you get to see all of Xero's awesome commission work. And like, you know, as a trans non-binary person myself, I just want to take the time to thank you for, you know, sharing your work, taking the time to create it, and like being you know, okay enough in who you are to just like share it and not care and bring joy and pleasure in people's lives without feeling shame for it. So that's definitely something I am working on, you know, trying to connect with myself and my body and my sexuality. So seeing other, you know, trans non-binary artists out there doing that and like helping me through that is so awesome. So, and again, like that's what we're all here for, is we're all supporting each other in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm just happy to share the space with you, and thank you.
Right back at you, honestly. Being able to do this is really healing and validating for me too.
That's awesome.
You know, so what I'm hoping is just by us doing what feels good, finding the others. I
Mm-hmm.
hope that some of the people watching right now get a little bit of that medicine too, and they go and find the others, and they go and start dreaming bigger dreams and doing what feels good, finding what feels good, sharing that with everybody else. You know,
Definitely.
if you are a non-binary person, if you are trans, if you are queer in any way just by existing, you are a pioneer species that is helping the world become wild again. That's what you are.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. I am happy to inhabit this wild world with you, Xero.
Likewise, Finn.
All right. Well, that is it for now. So I just wanted to thank you again, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And we'll post all of the links, and make sure you check Xero out on social media, on Twitter, Patreon. That's Xero Skyfire.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I will
Bye,
talk
everybody.
soon. All right.